Welcome to the Q&A Cafe here at the Georgetown Club in Georgetown on a very rainy day in, what is this, May? It should rain, right? And I am so happy to welcome Dr. Peter Marks, our guest and neighbor, and I don't know quite how to get where I want to go here, but as everybody knows, I kind of stumble and finally arrive. But it always struck, you live in the neighborhood, you and I are neighbors, we live around the corner from each other. And throughout the pandemic, I would see you walking your dog, as many other people here are used to doing. And at a time when so many doctors were going on TV, and some of them were totally, in official capacity like Anthony Fauci, or really wonderful expert capacity like your friend of mine, Scott Gottlieb, who is sat right there, and then various other doctors. And I just always noticed how you weren't going to do that. You didn't seek out the limelight, because it strikes me that scientists aren't really interested in being where you're sitting right now. So thank you for doing it. Am I right? Am I right about this?
I think that's correct.
You don't seek the attention.
That's right.
In fact, I think you were even asked to be on the whatever it was called, the COVID team, the thing that Trump set up.
That was the task force that I declined after a while because it was a really a media event more than a...
Right. You never wanted to be in the press room on the podium because, and I could go through your whole resume and we can talk about that, but your life is as a scientist and a clinician, and I just always think that people who do that just want to be in a laboratory with other people who do it. And I don't mean like a rat. So you tell me if I'm nailing this.
I think as public health, it's not being in a laboratory necessarily. It's working on the issues and actually getting stuff done. Right. And so I'm someone who likes to get stuff done, which means that to the extent that during the COVID pandemic, getting stuff done was getting a vaccine out. That's what the mission was at that point. I think to the extent that now I can justify kind of coming out sometimes and speaking to the media, it's because getting stuff done now is trying to restore confidence in people using medical products that work like vaccines, although I'm not the best expert at it.
Well, I think you have some expertise. I think you're being modest. You probably still have friends there, right? I mean, not everybody got flushed out, right?
No, that's correct.
And you probably feel that you can have a role for them, speaking out about public health?
Yes, I think so. I think it's very hard for people in public health right now who are still in the government to actually make any kind of comment about what's going on right now.
Well, let's do this. I'd like to do this because I think we always think we know everything about people, but probably a lot of people don't know everything about you and your path to where you're sitting right now and the situation you got yourself in, or inadvertently. But how did you find your way to science?
How did I find my way to science? I couldn't
Seriously?
Write an English sentence to save my life. That's how I found my way to science.
As a kid?
As a kid, it came naturally. It just was something. It's what interested me. To the point that when I got to college, I kind of knew I wanted to go into one of the sciences. I did not love math enough to go into physics. I didn't mind chemistry, and biology seemed really cool at the time. And I went to Columbia University at the time. There was a lot going on in cell molecular biology, so got involved with that. Ended up originally thinking I was going to be just a PhD biochemist, but through a variety of things, twists and turns, ended up going to medical school and a medical scientist training program.
And that was also at Columbia?
No, that was at New York University, where I did my graduate work, my PhD in a field, a part of cell biology, looking at how single cells move on surfaces. And then I completed my MD at NYU, then went up and decided that internal medicine was probably a more suitable subspecialty for me than surgery or something else, and went up and did a residency and hematology oncology fellowship at Brigham Women's Hospital in Boston, and then stayed on faculty there as a scientist for about 5 years. Ultimately, moving out, scientist clinician, I should say, and then ultimately moved on to work in industry for a total of about 5 years on drug development. First at a rare disease company, at the time it was called Genzyme, which was subsequently bought by Sanofi, and then for Novartis for a couple of years, and then went back to academic medicine at Yale for a number of years, running the leukemia service in the cancer center at Yale. And then I came to the federal government in 2012, very beginning of 2012, as the deputy director of the Center for Biologics, and became the center director in 2016. After lived through a couple of outbreaks, Ebola, Zika, and then the various exciting times at the beginning of 2016, 2017, we had kind of a genetic medicine starting to become realities. And then 2020, we had the COVID pandemic, which kept us quite busy. Then 2022, we had the Mpox outbreak, and so although I wasn't planning on spending as much time with infectious diseases, our area of FDA, the Center for Biologics, handled vaccines, blood products, cell tissue gene therapies, and so by nature, I ended up spending a lot of time with vaccines.
What prompted you to go into the government?
A desire to use all of the skills that I had developed and try to make a difference. I liked helping patients on an individual basis, but as a leukemia clinician, you can only help so many people. You can only take care of so many people in a day. And I wanted to have a greater impact on public health. I also wanted to be able to use some of the management skills that I developed over the years and the leadership skills more. So when I saw and I knew a little bit about the Center for Biologics at FDA from having interacted when I was in industry, so it seemed like a reasonable fit.
It probably seemed like an opportunity and not political, I would assume.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's exactly right. In fact, it did not feel at all like a political position. And for the first, say, 8 years, the first 4 years, it certainly was not political. And even during the first Trump administration, it did not feel that political per se. Do you know what I mean?
I think with AIDS, it was political, and then that kind of went away, and then it was kind of smooth sailing, and then COVID created a political environment.
Right, exactly.
It
got more and more politicized as COVID went on, in time.
You were only FDA, right?
Only FDA.
Explain how FDA and NIH intersect.
Right. So the public health services, NIH, FDA, and CDC all work somewhat closely together, especially in the setting of a pandemic or an outbreak, where FDA is primarily involved with the regulatory aspects of things, but we also do some basic aspects of vaccine development, because FDA works on strain selections and making sure that the vaccines are what they say they're going to be, in addition to the regulatory approvals. Obviously, NIH does the basic research on vaccines and helps advance them through clinical trials, and CDC helps deploy the vaccines. So each has its own aspect of what they do, but I was always at FDA, just at FDA.
But you're all in different buildings all over the city. Where were you situated, and did you have a lab there, or were you just in an office?
No, I was in an office there overseeing labs and people in offices out in Silver Spring. That's where the FDA is located right now.
And that's where you were.
Yeah.
So, I'd be curious we all have our COVID stories of how we first heard about it or began to hear about it. Tell us about where you were, what you were doing, when you first heard of COVID, who told you about it, and what was your initial reaction? Did you know before any of the rest of us that this was going to be the big one?
So I heard about COVID by way of kind of reports that started to come in January of 2020. And at that point, we were hearing reports of 70 or 80 cases of some...
In China.
In China, right. And by the end of January, the Chinese actually contacted us because they were interested in some of the simple therapeutics that you could develop rapidly, something called convalescent plasma. It's basically taking somebody's blood, making plasma from that blood, and giving it to someone else in order to give them back the antibodies that someone had developed from being infected with a virus. It's kind of a crude therapeutic, but it can be potentially life-saving in the setting of outbreaks. We helped them, give them some advice about that in late January, and then I think everyone was just hoping that it was going to come under control. I think it was then in but by late February, I think I actually remember even the dates. It's probably about February 26th, 27th, when it became clear that something really bad had happened. And the reason why you could actually tell something bad had happened was because at that point you could actually see spread of the virus outside of China to multiple different continents. It was in Asia, it was Asia, Africa, Europe, and both North and South America, and you knew that was kind of a very bad sign. And the cases started to accelerate, and so by that time it was pretty clear that we were going to be in for a pretty significant
problem. Were you already
problem.
in a crisis mode by then?
By the end of February, we were just transitioning into crisis mode. Within 2 weeks, by mid-March, we were in full crisis mode.
And by then we were all starting to...
Yeah, that was lockdown. About March 13th or so was like the lockdown started, yeah.
I remember you probably do also living in Georgetown when the rector of Christ Church became the first patient in D.C.
Yes, the index patient, right.
It was like that.
That's right.
I mean, I was at work that day, and it was a big deal because it had somehow made it to us. It had made it to Washington.
Yeah. Right, and so it was close by, and it became real for people.
No, but real for people on the outside is so different for real. You were probably always so many steps ahead of us. The discussion of creating a vaccine, is that just the first? I mean, is that like from the outset you're discussing a vaccine? Or is it something where it's organic and you think maybe we can create a vaccine?
So by the time we got to March, I think multiple people were starting to think about how are we going to make a vaccine, in part because by the time we were in mid-March, you were able to model how badly this virus was going to be. Because by March, you knew how many people were dying of it, you knew how fast it was spreading, and so you could develop models, best case scenarios, worst case scenarios, and know that if you didn't intervene, we were going to have something really bad. And the typical vaccine development timeline that was being brought forward in March 2020 was about a 2-year time to having a vaccine. That was really problematic because the problem was not going to be for the first couple months where there were going to be some deaths, but the problem was going to be over the next winter. When respiratory viruses tend to get worse, the number of deaths, the number of deaths that were being predicted by some of the models, the conservative models were 1 to 2 million deaths. The more significant models were 3 or 4 million deaths. And we didn't remember. It's very easy in hindsight. We didn't know a lot back then.
And more than the rest of us.
Well,
but
we didn't. But public health people, right? We couldn't see the future. We didn't know all the details. I think.
And you didn't see the politics coming yet, right?
No, right. And just like the people go crazy on the masking, nobody really knew how effective the masking was or wasn't going to be. And to be honest, probably masking when done correctly was probably more effective than you might think. When done incorrectly, which is how mostly it was done, it wasn't very effective.
Yeah.
A mask that doesn't cover your nose is not a mask. And a lot of the masks that were being used, whereas the KN95, some of the masks actually were probably reasonably effective when worn properly. So, but what happened was in March, it became apparent that we needed to do something. The current vaccine timelines, two years, just seemed like, should we really sustain that kind of
Right.
potential mortality? It was bad enough. Ultimately, it was bad enough with needing, tractor trailer morgues as it was. But it would have been much worse. So the question was, could we do something better? And that's what led to the development of Operation Warp Speed, which had first started out as just how can we just speed this up by getting rid of any unnecessary steps from a regulatory perspective, and ultimately grew to how can we, take an approach whereby we go all out to take vaccine candidates and try to study them as rapidly as possible without cutting corners and get to a vaccine that is effective.
How big is your team now? What has it grown from what to what? How many people are the core group you're working with? And are you just working 7 days a week?
Well, at that time,
Yeah.
So at that time, we were working about 7 days a week. People were working, despite the fact that we were getting, criticism from outside of FDA. People were working 16-hour, 14, 16-hour days. The team at that point is probably 100, 150 people.
Are you recruiting from other hospitals too, or other clinics?
Well, at that point, by the time Warp Speed really started to get going, the piece that really made a big difference was Alex Azar, the Secretary of Health and Human Services. When we pitched this to him, had a really brilliant idea. It was actually a really smart idea, which was to get the Department of Defense involved. Because they had ready-made logistics. You could just reassign people, and you didn't have to recruit. You didn't have to recruit them. You basically told them show up at 200 Independence Avenue on a given day, and that's what happened. And by mid-April, mid to late April, you had a group of people that were put together to try to move ahead the vaccine development programs. And by the time we got through May, you had all of the pieces put in place to be able to do the clinical trials that got done over the summertime that ultimately resulted in the findings of the vaccines that had efficacy against COVID by the end of the year. Well, by November, actually.
Could you sleep at night during this time? What did you say when you got home from work? What did you say to your...
I slept very well. I slept very well
you were
because we
exhausted?
were exhausted. We were going to sleep. I think probably we were surviving on about 4 or 5 hours of sleep a night and including on weekends for weeks on end, trying to do what we can. Because at the time we were doing two things at once. We were helping to develop a vaccine while also trying to help use therapeutics like convalescent plasma here in the United States, which became, very controversial for reasons that aren't entirely clear to me still. That all of that was going on all at once, so there was a lot of balls in the air, so to speak.
So you felt protected by Azar. You felt he was protecting your work from the outside world, letting you guys just work, get it done,
I think there was a fair amount.
And Fauci's taking heat too.
I think that's probably the case. Is that I was happy not to have to be there on the podium. The other reason why, let's just face it, is there was a lot of dysfunction within that group because there was some infighting between Fauci and others. Let's just leave that for right now.
Right.
But there was some infighting that probably was not going to be productive. And again,
that's noise.
If you
and you don't want the
if you
noise.
care about public health and getting stuff done, you want to get stuff done, right?
That's the part that I find critical. And I think that the public wants somebody who's just paying attention to driving.
Right. No, that's exactly right. Do you want your driver to have a nice conversation with you and get to the airport an hour late, or do you want just a driver who's going to get you there on time? And so I think.
Yeah, well, not yesterday, a couple of days ago, I saw one of the cars that don't have a driver go through Georgetown. So.
Okay, yeah.
Hoping that won't happen to science.
Yeah.
But was there a darkest day for you? Was there a day when you almost gave up hope, or did give up hope, or were you constantly seeing something on the horizon that maybe nobody else saw?
I think the good news was I think I trusted the process, that things were going to ultimately, we were going to hopefully find a vaccine. There was no guarantee, but we had enough. I think the strategy was to have enough different candidates that we'd find something that worked. I think there were some very dark days because and that's what made me kind of pull out of this idea of trying to deal with the White House a lot, because there were some meetings that were just excruciating, where watching the political infighting was just unbearable.
Right.
It just you could just see it. It was just noise. It was just total noise of people being very small, arguing over stuff that really didn't matter because they wanted to be right.
Well,
the answer is not
politics.
Am I right? The answer is, are we going to have something that is right for public health?
Do you remember when you had something that you first felt could be injected into a person, and how did you find that person to inject it into?
So actually, the clinical trials that were done by Pfizer and Moderna, so early on, by June, there were candidates that could be tested in humans. And by November, we knew that some of those candidates were both safe and very effective. And
you knew some were not safe too.
We did. We learned, and we knew some did not appear, but there were some that clearly never made it, which is also one of the funny things. Just as an aside, there are all these people all these conspiracy theories that these were you just let stuff through. Well, there was a vaccine by AstraZeneca that we killed, basically, because it had problems. There was another vaccine by Johnson & Johnson, the Janssen vaccine, that did make it to an emergency use authorization, which ultimately kind of died a natural death because it also had side effects.
I mean, that is the route to a successful vaccine, though, isn't it? I mean,
right. Well, we tried. We had multiple. Right. We had multiple things in the fire. Right.
But I can't imagine. I mean, I'm not saying that lightly, because when you're there and you're telling a person we're going to try this out on you, it's an experiment. But they've already agreed to participate.
Right.
Did you ever become a guinea pig yourself?
I did not participate in the clinical trials. It would have been unethical to, we don't do self-experimentation. But I
you
sure
had
was.
to choose one to start with, right?
I sure was up there as one of the first people getting vaccinated with one of the mRNA vaccines. That's exactly right.
Right. Because by then you were certain about it, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, by that time, it was pretty certain that the vaccines, that the COVID vaccines were working and that they were safe. I mean, the mRNA vaccines, this was not the first time an mRNA vaccine had ever been given to a human. That's the first time they had been authorized for large-scale use. They had been in development for about 10 years for a variety of other infectious diseases. Probably before COVID came along, they'd been given to about 10,000 people in various clinical trials. COVID came along. Each clinical trial that was done, Pfizer's and Moderna's, Pfizer's was about 45,000 people randomized, half to get the vaccine, half to get a placebo. Moderna's was, I think, about 30,000 or so, same thing, randomized. So once you start to have, tens of thousands of people vaccinated, you can actually do the statistical calculations to know what adverse events you could be missing, and you actually start to feel more comfortable about things. We actually did miss some minor adverse events, or not so minor ones, with the COVID vaccines. There were some allergic reactions that we learned to deal with. And obviously some of the side effects like myocarditis that we learned about what happens when you give them too close together, particularly to young individuals.
I was going to say that was mostly in younger
That was
people.
younger men mostly. And now that's not an issue anymore because we don't give them on top of each other now that we've gotten past that point. Compared to what the alternative would have been about not, I mean, here's again, we have some people who say that these vaccines killed more people than they helped, which is total insanity, absolute insanity, because on both sides of the aisle, everyone understands that those vaccines saved millions of lives in this country, over 10 million lives. Some people, it's somewhere between,
Well,
10 and 50
historically, we
million
have
lives
vaccines
globally.
that not one size fits all.
Yeah.
That there are going to be situations where I understand that one of the reasons I wanted to have you tell your story and talk about what you know and how you've come to know it is because in doing some of the research for this, I didn't expect all the vitriol that is out there about you going way back, not just since the Trump 2.0, but the vitriol that's out there.
So vaccine hesitancy dates back to Benjamin Franklin. Okay, vaccines have been around. So the first concepts of vaccination date back to about the 1500s in China, in Asia. But real vaccination, modern vaccination, dates its origin to about the late 1700s with Jenner in Great Britain, with understanding that you could prevent smallpox by inoculating people against cowpox. He actually showed that worked. People had been preventing smallpox before that by giving small doses of smallpox, but he realized that you could use a different virus and prevent smallpox in a much safer way. That actually ultimately became, as it was handed down, the smallpox vaccine, which eradicated smallpox. But vaccination, even back in the late part of the 18th century, was controversial. And George Washington was a big proponent of vaccination. Benjamin Franklin was actually very hesitant to actually get his child, his son, variolated, which was vaccinated at the time, and actually his son died of smallpox. So vaccine hesitancy has been around for a long time. Why it took on such a badge of, it became a real badge of I'm vaccinated, I'm not vaccinated, I believe it. I don't understand it. I think part of it was we skipped a step during Operation Warp Speed that was in the plan, but
of education.
Right. There was I know because I wrote it. So there was a step that was supposed to be a very large educational effort by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to essentially try to make people feel like this was an important thing to do. I think part of the education campaign was explaining what the vaccine was, also explaining how by getting vaccinated, we would all come together as a country and help each other, right? Message that didn't seem to resonate with certain people at the time.
You'd never before COVID received hate mail or been a target of hate, right? How did you cope with that?
I have to be honest, as the director of the Center for Biologics, we had enough controversial things that I'd had hate mail. We had hate mail with issues around blood donor deferral criteria, around other vaccines and other issues. So it wasn't, but never quite the quantity of interesting mail as came in during COVID.
Well, and you probably, I wonder if you thought during the Biden administration that part of your life was behind you, or was it still happening, that you were a target and that there was controversy?
Well, things got ever more controversial with during the Biden administration because of, I think, a combination of leftovers from Mr. Trump's administration of being angry about vaccination and some missteps by the Biden administration of wanting to try to force things that probably should have just taken, again, the science should have just gone along. And so I think there were some, what might be said as unforced errors that occurred during the Biden administration.
As we all got better, we got weirder.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is really, and then the question is, how did we end up today where we have state legislatures trying to ban the best vaccine technologies that we have right now?
Well, and measles. I mean, just the whole measles issue. You know, you've got kind of like.
Right, because we have, well, it's because.
There's no central message.
Right, it's because you do need a central message. And we're worse than not having a central message. We have messages that are wrong, right? We have messages about fetal parts in vaccines which don't exist. We have messages about side effects to vaccines which are wrong. And we also have a lack of cohesiveness of understanding that, look, if we all keep the measles vaccination rates up, people who are immunocompromised, people who are too young to receive the vaccine, elderly people who lose their immunity, you don't have to worry then, because if as a group we commit to keeping vaccination rates above 90 to 95%, we don't have these issues. Unfortunately, that's kind of gone by the wayside.
You're a young man. Do you still get a COVID vaccine?
I'm not that young, but I still will get the COVID vaccine. I still get the flu vaccine because the benefits still outweigh the risks. I also, do you recommend people who get the flu and the COVID all at the same time? Or I think you should separate them, because if you're going to have a bad reaction, you want to know which one. The answer is do whatever's most convenient. I agree with you that if you happen to live a block away from CVS, I would get them on different days, or a block from Morgan Pharmacy, or wherever it is. On the other hand, if for many of this country, for many places in this country, people have to travel, a distance to a healthcare provider where they're taking them on the same day. There's no problem with doing so.
Did you eventually get COVID?
I was lucky enough.
You're still a virgin?
I have not had COVID.
I lost my virginity just last year, and it was I had made it a long time, and it was Dr. Deborah Birx who told me something that I think is interesting, and it goes back to more of these. We'll get to that, but. She said after you've had COVID, you're better off getting Novavax rather than the other vaccines, because the Novavax will repurpose the antibodies that are in you. And I've heard. Okay, well, I'm sure if she were here, she wouldn't mind my saying it, but. I don't think there's really data that can corroborate that. Okay, well, I did it, so
I think it's no reason. I would say probably the best vaccine to get is the one that you can get in your arm.
Yeah.
I actually think Tony Fauci is correct. I think Tony Fauci is correct about that one, and I think this is one of the problems that we got into also in COVID, is we started splitting hairs about things instead of understanding public health. Public health is not about teeny weeny things. Public health is about
great big things.
Great big things, like don't swim in like E. coli infested waters, things like that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
By the way, we have a community garden plot which overlooks Rock Creek Park, and I can overlook the area down below sometimes. People bathe there all the time, sometimes unclothed. People also do other things into Rock Creek, which would make me not want to go swimming in that creek.
Look, when they say you shouldn't even let your pets go in it, I think
I would not let my dog go in Rock Creek.
That'd be fair warning to humans, okay, so I'll just go there.
And by the way, the other reason not to go into Rock Creek is the District of Columbia will tell you it is a sewage overflow area, just like the Potomac is. So after rains like today, I just don't advise it. E. coli and other coliforms.
Some people just aren't reasonable. Yeah.
Although they do say what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
How has it been for you, since you and I live in the same block and RFK Jr. moved in on our block? when you heard that, what did you feel like he was following you around?
No, I felt like I must have done something very bad cosmically to have deserved
Your
that.
garden's practically adjoined.
Yeah, well, we're about 150 feet away at the back of our garden to his house, maybe 100 feet away.
All of our gardens kind of join up because we don't have an alley in our block. So
Yeah.
it makes it verdant and full of wonderful animal life, but we're all just there together. Have you run into him on the street yet?
I have not, and I'm not looking to do so.
Yeah. Oh, so you've got a whole new route now for walking the dog.
No, you know what? I believe this is Mr.
Yeah.
Trump's choice to have him as his healthcare secretary. I think his choices. We all make choices in life. I don't agree with his choices. I think they will come back to haunt him. Because I think once sanity comes back and people realize that the wellness industry, which is largely based on how people feel about products and what they say about products like vitamins, oh, this is good for you and that's not how actually pharmaceuticals, those of us who have developed pharmaceutical products, the reason why it costs $500 million to actually develop a pharmaceutical product is you actually have to have a remarkable thing. It's called evidence. Evidence means you actually have to show that it works. It has a scientific basis, that you understand its efficacy, and you also understand its safety. On the other hand, if you just want to give something to someone that you don't know whether it works or not, or tell someone to do something, its profit margin is a lot better, right? If you invest very little, but say it's, and it doesn't cost a lot to make, that's unfortunately what a lot of the wellness industry is about. Not all of it, don't get me wrong. And there's nothing wrong. Yoga's good. No one's saying it's not good. You know what? No one's saying that massage is not good.
Thank you.
But no one's saying that. But what we are, I think what one has to understand is that traditional medicines do have a place. And vaccination is actually critically important. And I'm just going to make a pitch here to you, which is that what we have done by undermining vaccines in this country makes us remarkably weaker as a nation, because we are now susceptible to natural and man-made threats from the external environment in a way that we were not when we had robust acceptance of vaccines. Vaccination is a way of providing immunity to a population that you simply can't do that in any other way. Someone would say, oh, well, can't we just all take pills if something comes along to prevent something? You simply can't make enough pills, for instance, we couldn't have put everyone on Paxlovid for a year to prevent COVID. You just can't make enough pills, and the side effects actually would have been much greater than they would have been had we gotten people vaccinated.
Do we have herd immunity now?
I don't think we have herd immunity to COVID, because the problem with this
that was always the goal.
Well, the problem that we
political
have
goal.
is this particular viruses are each unique. There are thousands of different viruses, and each virus is a little bit they're like different people. Unfortunately, coronaviruses are ones which our bodies don't make a really long-lasting good immune response to.
Interesting.
So unfortunately, there are two problems with COVID. One is we don't make a great immune response to it, and particularly in older individuals, the immune response wanes over time. So 3 or 4 months after you've gotten the shot, even if we had the same COVID circulating, your immunity against it tends to go down. It dwindles faster in older people than it does in younger people, but it does the same. The other problem is the virus itself, as you've noted, it keeps evolving and evolving.
Yeah.
And luckily this winter it didn't evolve tremendously, so that the match was reasonable. But because it continues to evolve, we just don't have herd immunity. Maybe someone someday will get to a universal COVID vaccine that takes care of multiple, and people will actually take it. But it's a different virus, for instance, than measles. The great thing about measles is very bad. It's probably the most contagious of any viruses, but it stayed the same. And so the measles vaccine that was given in 1963, tweaked a little bit, is still the same measles vaccine that's given today.
Is it true if you've had measles as a kid that you have an immunity that's built in?
Yeah, once you've had natural immunity, once you've had measles, I had measles as a kid.
I did too.
That's why we don't. That's why generally, if you were born before 1957, we generally say, don't worry about. You don't need to get vaccinated. Don't worry about it. If you're born after 1963, we generally say, you probably should have 2 doses of the measles vaccine because at that point people weren't getting the measles anymore. And if you're in 1957 to 1963, go see your doctor and talk about it because you probably you may or may not benefit from the vaccine.
Because it's very contagious, right?
It is, right. If you haven't had measles and you haven't had the vaccine, and you go into a room where someone has been that has measles, it hangs around in the air for 2-3 hours.
Yeah, so you don't want to be on an airplane.
You don't want to be on an airplane next to a kid who has measles.
How do you think of the way Tony Fauci was treated?
Tony became essentially, I think Tony is the human analog of what happened to the mRNA vaccines, kind of this thing to beat on for all the ills, right? We're angry at COVID, we're angry at the financial problems, we're angry at how it hurt our children's development, we were angry how we didn't see loved ones get buried. We decided we're going to take it out on something. So we took it out on the vaccine, or we took it out on Tony Fauci. Yeah, and it's terribly unfair. Yeah. I think it is displaced anger. I mean, I think we should be mourning what we lost, right? But we don't have to blame. I mean, this is the problem with our human nature. We have to find someone to blame. And unfortunately, politicians like to actually bring out the worst in us by telling them to blame, they tell us to blame someone.
Don't blame me, blame
them. Whereas what they really should be saying is, look, this was collectively something that we all need to mourn, that we tried our best. We made some mistakes. Our children are worse. We know it's probably from the standpoint of socialization. Some of our children are worse off. I'm not sure what we would have done all that differently because
we had to do something.
I think there's a reader somewhere down the block here. I didn't have a crystal ball. Maybe I should have gone to see the reader and she could have told me what it was going to look like more. Yeah. And Madam Olga would have said, oh, you should have done X, Y, Z. But we didn't have that. So we did our best.
And we're all here.
Yeah,
we're all back out in the world.
Right, we're all back in the world. We might have lost, but we lost some people. I mean,
we did.
We did.
There was a catastrophe.
There are people, who are not here. Who I know pre-COVID who are not here because of it. But we would have lost many more had we not taken the precautions that we did.
Right, we could still be in it.
Yes.
I think that you deserve gratitude from all of us, and I want to say for myself, thank you. The work you did. It's very, very important to me, really. So our time is up. Tell us, Peter, what are you doing now? Are you just enjoying?
I am doing some consulting work, and I will do that for the time being.
If the things changed and somebody you believed in came back to the FDA, would you go back to it?
I sure would.
There you go.
I think that's
That's public service. Well, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. See you next time.